Hi, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw this realistic knight piece from chess using charcoal pencils. So let's get started. As always, these are the art supplies I'm going to use for this drawing, and you can pause the video right here to note them down. I'm using this 250 GSM paper from my ordinary sketchbook, which is available in almost all the art stores or stationeries around the world. So you don't have to use any fancy paper for this specific drawing. And the drawing position area is 12 × 18 inches. I drew the outline using grid method, and you can find the detailed step-by-step process from making the grid to outlining on my Patreon profile. Link is in the description. Okay, so let's start the shading process, and I'm firstly scraping some charcoal by rubbing it onto the scraper. You can also use any rough surface to convert it into a powder. I'm adding a base layer in all the areas that are darker in the reference image by dipping my brush into the powder. Keep on layering the charcoal by using small circular motions to achieve a smooth base. This small portion near the mouth is missing some blended base. So to achieve such an effect, I'm using the dirty end of a blending stump and adding this subtle texture. When the blending is done in the head portion, it's time to add the darker details, and I'm using my medium pit charcoal. I've created a sharp chisel tip and now darkening the outline first, and this will help you in achieving crisp strokes. And now thoroughly filling the ear portions which are pitch black in the reference image. I prefer using this pit charcoal as I like how pitch black it turns out without any dullness in the shade afterwards. But you can use a regular charcoal pencil if you want. And by the way, you can get access to our premium content and support this channel through Patreon. You can sign up through different membership levels and get access to all the outlines and grid references, etc. We have an ever-growing library of hundreds of exclusive and real-time tutorials. And you will also get access to 4 new tutorials every month. You can also post your artworks in our active community of patrons and participate in our weekly critique sessions where I give my honest and positive critiques on your artworks, so you can improve your skills and get better with your drawing. Visit the link in description and become a premium member today. It has always been my goal to provide free tutorials and information on drawing and art related tools to general public. And keeping with that theme, I would like to thank all these incredible individuals who backed our channel on Patreon last month. Their generous support enabled me to produce this free tutorial for all of you guys. Okay, so I'm repeating the similar process of darkening the outlines first and then thoroughly filling all the darker areas for the rest of the face portion. I would suggest you guys to keep the reference image in front of you either in soft or hard form and keep relating to it while adding such important details, as one wrong placement can ruin the whole look and symmetry of the drawing. Also notice that I'm maintaining a normal pressure on my pencil to achieve smooth and even base without any tone difference in the strokes. Okay, so as the darker details are almost done, it's time to add the highlights, and I'm using my flat tip mono zero eraser. I'm carefully starting from the top portion of the ear and using small back and forth motions to pick up the charcoal. When the base highlight is done, it's time to make it pop up even more by adding a brighter highlight using an electric eraser. And look how realistic and shiny it has started to look. Okay, so moving on to the next ear, and I'm going all over the lighter areas and lifting up the excess charcoal in between the darker portions. And then to make them appear more crisp, I'm using my sharp tip electric eraser and going over the previous strokes. This bottom portion of the back ear has very bright thin strokes. So to mimic such an effect, I'm using my flat tip mono zero eraser and adding this curved stroke. I'm adding similar thin highlights right beneath the one we just added. Moving on to the right side of the ear, and we can see in the reference image that it has very blended highlights. So to mimic such an effect, I'm firstly going along the outline using relatively higher pressure, and then decreasing the pressure as I move towards the left side to create a softer edge which is perfectly blended with the surroundings. If we look at the reference image, we can see that right below the ear there is a small semicircular highlight. So to create such an effect, I'm firstly picking up the charcoal in required shape. Moving on to the next portion, and I'm following the similar process of picking up the charcoal from the lighter areas first using mono eraser, and then topping these highlights off using an electric eraser, and this will create the required shiny effect. For the front portion of the face, I'm directly diving in with my electric eraser and adding these small bright highlights. Make sure to keep your mono zero eraser clean and sharp at all times during this entire erasing process by rubbing it vertically on a sandpaper. This way you will achieve sharp corners all around the tip which are perfect for adding thin highlights. And you also don't have to sharpen the tip again and again. Just rotate the eraser and keep erasing until all the sharp corners are used. I'm reducing the pressure on my eraser while working on the areas which need lighter highlights. The oval shape also has bright highlight on the right side. So I'm adding a thin stroke first and then will create a gradient later on. Now to further fine tune this highlight, I'm using my perfection eraser and adjusting the gradient. Never hesitate to go back and adjust the details until you are fully satisfied with the results. This portion is looking a bit patchy, so I'm carefully going over it using my medium-sized toy brush. Now moving on to the next portion, and I'm following the similar process of darkening the outline first using a soft pit charcoal and then blending it lightly using a medium-sized toy brush to add very soft base layer in this left portion. I almost forgot to add these highlights on the face portion, so I'm now adding them using a perfection eraser and then extending this highlight and adjusting the shape of the pattern using an electric eraser. I am also cleaning the spill of the charcoal from the edges to achieve a crisp outline. Coming back to the body portion, and when we look at the reference image, we can see that this center portion has a jet black base. So I'm filling this area thoroughly using soft pit charcoal. I've created a round tip of my pencil to avoid any harsh lines or strokes. And keep on adding this layer using back and forth motions, and don't worry if some areas are looking patchy at this moment. When you have added a first layer of charcoal, it's time to add another layer to fill all those empty spots in the first layer. And you can clearly see how smooth and jet black this layer has started to look. This small shape right beside the black portion has a relatively softer base. So I'm filling this area using a soft pit charcoal. Now it's time to blend it, and I'm using my medium-sized toy brush and dipping it into the charcoal powder and then going over this area while adding a base layer using circular motions. This will blend the previous layer along with filling all the empty spots thoroughly, giving a very smooth and even finish. By using the same powder, I'm also shading this lower portion of the body to add the required base. Notice that I'm layering more powder on the area under the darker portions to create a darker reflection, just like the reference image. And now using less powder for the lighter areas after carefully analyzing the reference image. The right side has a very light base, so I'm picking up a very small amount of charcoal and then shading this required portion. Make sure to keep the pressure on your brush very low while adding base layer to avoid patchiness. Due to blending, the edges of the black portion has started to look smudged and dull, so I'm adjusting it using a soft pit charcoal. I'm carefully and slowly going along the edges, and look how crisp it has started to look. The darker texture on the right side also needs some adjustments, so I'm also going over it to make it appear darker. I am layering the charcoal on the right side just like the way I did for the rest of the body portion. Okay, so now let's add the highlights, and when we look at the reference image, we can see that this right side has a lighter gradient. So to mimic such an effect, I'm firstly adding this thin bright stroke all along the darker one. Make sure to keep the tip of your eraser sharp while adding such thin highlights to avoid thick and blunt strokes. And when this bright highlight is done, it's time to make the left side of it softer. And as always, I'm using my perfection eraser. I'm going along and slightly over it, and it will blend the harsh edge along with creating the required soft gradient. Now by using the perfection eraser, I'm also picking up the charcoal from this lighter area in between the darker ones. After adding the highlights, the darker texture on the right side has started to look a bit dull and smudged. So I'm adjusting the edges using a soft pit charcoal with a sharp tip. This lighter portion on the left side is almost pure white in the reference image. So I'm cleaning the excessive charcoal spill using an electric eraser. And look how shiny and reflective the body has started to look. The small portion is looking a bit dull and flat from the bottom. So I'm layering charcoal using a soft pit pencil and blending it using a dry brush. And look how small detail made the flat surface look 3D in just a few minutes. Moving on to the right lower portion, and I'm extending the darker and lighter details by following the similar process, just like the way I did for the upper portion. The lower portion is looking a bit patchy to me, so I'm again going over some areas and layering charcoal. Okay, so as this black portion has some thin highlights on the right side, So I'm tracing the shape and adding thin stroke using my flat tip mono zero eraser. As we are working on the pitch black surface, so it's very important to clean the tip of your eraser more frequently to achieve brighter highlights. I'm also adding these small curved strokes to mimic the glossy effect. Notice that I'm applying higher pressure to add brighter stroke and reducing it for the softer ones. Moving on to the paste, and I'm firstly scraping the soft pit charcoal on a scraper and converting the charcoal into a powder. And now adding a 3D base using a dry brush by following the similar process as I did for the upper portions. Now let's start darkening the darker areas, and I'm using my medium pit charcoal this time. By using this sharp tip, I'm darkening all the smaller areas carefully by keeping the pressure high on my pencil. Now when the darker texture is done, grab your scraper with a charcoal powder and start layering the charcoal over the areas which are looking a bit dull using a medium-sized dry brush. You can skip this step if your drawing is looking just as dark as the reference image. Now let's start the highlighting process, and for the right side, I'm extending the previous highlights using a perfection eraser. I'm applying higher pressure near the darker edge and then reducing it as I move towards the right side. If we look at the reference image, we can see that this portion has a very light, subtle highlight. So I'm creating such an effect by adding this vertical stroke and maintaining the pressure on my eraser very low. Now to fine tune this highlight, I'm adding a horizontal stroke using a pit charcoal pencil, and then flicking my pencil towards the bottom to shade the area with a very light pressure. This flicking method will create the strokes with blended ends. Now carefully go over this area and blend it slowly using a medium-sized dry brush. Due to blending, the lower portion of this darker area has started to look dull. So I'm adjusting it using my medium pit charcoal. This lower portion has a darker patch which is not going anywhere even after blending with a dry brush. So now I'm picking up the excessive charcoal from this area using a perfection eraser. Make sure to keep the pressure on your eraser very low while working on such areas to avoid over highlighting. Now I'm repeating the similar process of adding softer highlights using a perfection eraser, just like the way I added earlier. Notice that the outline of this whole base is looking too dark. So I'm picking up the excessive charcoal from the whole outline and then blending it afterwards using a dry brush to match it with the rest of the base shade. I'm carefully going over all the areas which are lighter in the reference image using a perfection eraser very carefully. Again, keep relating to the reference image while adding such intricate details to avoid any mistake. And don't panic if you accidentally add any highlights at the wrong place. Just shade the area with a brush, and you can use a very tiny amount of powder if needed. And then add the highlight in the correct place, just like the way I'm doing here. The bottom portion is missing a base layer, so I'm layering charcoal to match it with the reference image. Now it's time to add the brighter highlights, and I'm using my electric razor with a sharp and clean tip. This will effectively clean all the excess charcoal from these lighter areas. Now let's create the reflection of this bright portion, and I'm picking up the charcoal, keeping the pressure on the eraser very low. I'm using a perfection eraser as we want very soft and subtle highlights. Keep on going back and forth with your tools and add the required highlights and details for the rest of the base portion. And by using the electric razor, I'm cleaning this pill of the charcoal from the outline to give the nice, sharp and crisp edges. These lighter areas on the left side are still looking less bright, so I'm going over them using a white pit pastel. And this layer will add a nice pop to the whole drawing. And with this last step, we are done with this super quick and easy night drawing. It takes so much time and efforts to create these free drawing tutorials for you guys. So please leave a like if you enjoyed this one. It helps me a lot as an artist. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.